Hello, everybody. Can you hear me all right? Can you hear me at the back? If you want to, you might not want to. Welcome. So pleased to see you. What a fantastic day it's been. We're now, oh, can you hear me? I'm getting tips. I'm getting tips from the front row. Is that loud enough? Yes? Are you sure? Yeah? Just a bit more? Bit more. All right. I shall project. Just do this if I start to get quiet. That is unlikely, but it could happen. There's a first time for everything. We're a little bit Led Zeppelin at Nebworth sort of feedback. We might arrange that, Rob. Our session is on, very important and very depressing, Farage and Reform UK, taking on the new far right in Britain. So important. And I'm Louise Raw. I'm a historian, a journalist, and all-purpose sort of annoyer of fascists and the far right, as you all are. Brilliant to have you here with us. So how the session will run, I've got a fantastic panel with me. I've got Weyman Bennett, the co-convenor of Stand Up to Racism. I've got Maria Chandragyani. I said that wrong, haven't I, Maria? Say it properly.
Maria Chandragyani.
I knew I was going to get that wrong. Who's the president-elect of UCU. So it's fantastic to have her with us. And online, we've got Amarjeet Singh from Wales TUC. So a brilliant panel to discuss that with us. So how's it going to work? Our speakers are going to have about 5 to 8 minutes each. And then I'm going to open up the floor for discussions, and we want to get as many of you in as we can. I'm going to be very strict on timing, 2 to 3 minutes for everyone from the floor, but just purely because we do want to get as many people in as possible. And also we've got to end on time, otherwise people come up and shout at me. So thank you so much for being here. Just before we start, as we're coming into the Christmas season, I wanted to show you the Reform UK nativity scene. This straight from Reform headquarters, they've just unveiled it today. We have no people from the Middle East, no single parents, no refugees, and certainly no one giving birth to any Palestinian activists. Thank you. Can I hand over to Weyman Bennett? Weyman, go, and I will wave this at you when we're a minute in.
Okay.
Fantastic, thank you. Weyman, co-convenor of Stand Up to Racism.
Thank you. I think this is a really important question about how do we stop reform? And it's just part of the debates that we're going to be having over the next few weeks to work out how we push them back from a position. The first thing to say is that Nigel Farage, I could say many things about Nigel Farage and parliamentary language and all that, but I'll say that what we're seeing is that reform is trying to turn itself into a mass party of the far right. That's the first thing we have to understand. They're not the same as a fascist party, but they're part of the ecosystem of the far right. They're a racist populist party, and it's easy for them to produce the kind of atmosphere that will build and sustain a far right party. There's a party, I'm probably mispronouncing this, Ilias inside Greece, which was the forerunner to Golden Dawn, that produced a kind of atmosphere where you could have a Golden Dawn type party that had parliamentary candidates. Today they have 100,000 members. They will be boosted by Donald Trump's, I mean, he always seems to, we should call him the member for Manhattan, for the amount of time he spends inside his own constituency. He's more in Manhattan than he's in Clacton. And I think that we can see that he'll be part of that. I think two things. Firstly, the demonstration that we had on the 26th prevented them from immediately linking up with the street movement of Robinson. It's very important that we did that. If you notice, they had an argument in their own leadership. They turned around and said that Robinson's people are our people. And then Richard Tye said they're not our people. That was achieved by the mass demonstrations exposing and making them afraid about how close links you can have with Robinson, who is a fascist, and the movement that he's trying to build is a fascist movement. I think that at the moment, that reform remain the biggest danger to us. They feel that they've got the wind in their sails. You see them going around the place like they've got something to say. They talk about two-tier policing in a kind of way as if, I mean, the idea that poor Mr. Farage can't drive down the street in his Jag without being stopped to see if he's got any ganja in the inside hidden on him, and he's not treated as an equal citizen. And when's this all gonna end? Beside that, we have to look at what's taking place. The Blackpool Council election, Labour won against Reform with 31. It was won by 31%, down by 16%. Reform UK won 30%. The Tories lost the seat and their vote dropped by 29% to 22%. Reform came third in the council election side Scotland. If you look at it in reality, it means that people will do deals with Reform. In other words, Reform will pull politics to the right if they actually get into that position. There's not an accident that I'm sure that Amajit will say about in Wales, where they've got proportional elections coming up on the 26th, coming up in 2 years' time, that they held their conference there. And one of the reasons why they held their conference there, they said it's good picking grounds. They said the steel mills have closed, the coal pits have closed. They said there's an atmosphere of despair which they can build on. And of course, they said the reason why this was happening was because of immigration. It does remind me of those kind of the kind of Trumpian people that said that the reason why the hurricanes happened was because people weren't praying hard enough inside Florida. In terms of what they're doing is trying to build off the back of that despair. Nevertheless, they have inside their ranks. Every time one of the things we're going to have to do is that they hide the people from in the far right in their ranks. If they recruit 100,000 members, I guarantee you that they had a meeting inside Wolverhampton where they won a seat. When they had that meeting, I could see known BNP members inside the meeting, which I've seen before. One of the things which we're going to have to do is expose those people. Because when you do that, actually what Reform do is they run away and say, we're not nasty people. Do you know what I mean? We're really good people. And we have to pull this mask away that they're not racist and they're not what and they represent something. So we are going to call them a racist party, and we are going to call them far right, and we are going to call them the billionaire club, billionaires boys club, because that's who they represent. After all, they're talking about privatizing the NHS, and they're saying that we have to have our own insurance, and they are talking about the dismantling of trade unions in that way. So in other words, the biggest thing is, the truth is that as well is that people say that they're a threat to the Tories, to Badenoch. They are a threat to the Tories as well, but they're also a threat to Labour. In 98 seats coming second means that we have to do something about this, because one of the things I thought was most frightening was when they did mock elections inside schools, people stood for Reform. In other words, they were winning a younger audience. Usually the Nazis aren't that popular inside schools and various other things because they represent something much more. We're going to have a systematic argument about exposing who Reform is. Plus, there's another argument inside the trade unions, is that because they're not Nazis and they've got 5 elected candidates, although when you listen to Anderson talk, you don't even realize, he's an ex-miner, and straight ahead what goes inside your head, scab. Do you know what I mean? In terms of where he comes from inside the trade union movement, what we're facing is the attempt to give a kind of respectability to far-right politics, to add as a bridge to take that on further. So we're going to have, as well as exposing them for who they are, I think we do have to also disrupt who they are. We do have to raise the question, go in there and say, can you explain? I don't know if people saw the interview with Anderson where he was asked, what are you going to do for the NHS? I don't know. What are you going to do about public spending? I don't know. What are you going to do about the railways? I don't know. The only policy they seem to have is the policy about blaming migrants for everything. That melanin, if you've got melanin inside your skin, somehow it changes the composition of where places are or what's happening. So they don't have GDP, they've got gradual deepening melanin process taking place of explaining economic processes. So they do have to be exposed for who they are, and we can block them from that, because at the same time, he likes to be popular. So we should label them as having the Farage riots. Did you see him grimace every time he's put with that question? Because he wants to play with the big people. And at the same time, they haven't built up a big enough momentum in order to do that. But nevertheless, I would say in 4 years' time, they are going to be the threat. They are going to be the alternative, unless they're actually stopped. And they can be stopped by being exposed and not having an easy road. And I will end up on this. I don't know if you remember a certain group of people who weren't invited to the press conference, namely Stand Up to Racism, invited themselves to the press conference, and it became public about what they stood for. They were anti-refugee, they were racist, they were aiming for division. In other words, you can't intervene on them, but also I think one of the things we have to do is inoculate the working class workplaces for them to be able to organize. I think we should make sure they're isolated, make sure they cannot have candidates that stand and sponsored by trade unions, by community organizations, and we have to expose them for where they're at. And I'll stop there because my time is up.
Fantastic. Weyman Bennett from Stand Up to Racism and Searchlight Magazine, who are here, have done some really good work with Southwest anti-fascists exposing. This is a reform guy called Daryl Hawkes who was organising for them before the election, but they kicked out all the fascists, right? I'm sure he's just waving at somebody, right? And this guy here, Frankie Ruffalo, also a Southwest reform guy, with Anne-Marie Waters, some of you will know, absolutely vicious Islamophobic fascists. So have they kicked out all the fascists? That's a no. Spoiler alert, no, they haven't. All right, joining us next, we have Amajit Singh from Wales TUC, who's joining us online. Amajit, thank you so much for joining us. Take it away.
Yes, thank you for the invite. Yes, Amajit Singh. I work for TUC Cymru, but I'm here in personal capacity. And just carry on from where Weymouth has just left off. And I think, you know, this is not just trying to frighten people, but this is going to be reality if we don't work towards exposing Reform UK and what they actually stand for. And if you look at the general election, and although they only got 5 seats in Westminster, none from Wales, but you've got 5, you know, individuals who represent reform and their ideology around immigration and asylum seekers. And that feeds the narrative to the public that these are acceptable people that are representing individuals in their constituencies. We know that their rhetoric, their racist attitudes are behind the scenes. And in Wales, although they never got no seats, but if you look at the projection of the votes, they came second in a lot of them seats in Wales. Out of the 30 seats, no Reform UK, but got high numbers in individual seats. And when we have the Senate elections in 2026, the frightening part is that actually through proportional representation and the increase in Senate members from 60 to 96 does give them in the projection around 17 seats. Now that's just Reform out of 96 seats. However, if the Tories also get a large amount of seats in Wales through proportional representation, that the fear factor is, do they have a coalition in Wales that demonstrates that the general election in 4 years' time, that they work together and try the same in the UK at Westminster. We know there's going to be council elections in the coming years in England, and we've seen in the past where the BNP had 2 MEPs in Brussels, and they did actually gain a number of council seats prior to 2009. And through the work that we did in exposing the BNP and in having the 2 individuals deselected from Brussels and Europe, the councils as well started to break up. And that was because of the infighting. And as Weyman has said, you know, Tice and Farage, there is, you know, this agitation amongst them where Tice is the person who actually sort of brought reform to the forefront and then brought in Nigel Farage. But now Nigel Farage is the largest shareholder in Reform UK. And we've got to understand they're a PLC, you know, they are through membership. I think some of the work I've done is around 115,000 members that they have got. But remember, they're not like trade unions, and we must expose them that actually the members have no say within Reform UK. They are told what the policies are. You know, in the coming months and years, we've got to make sure that everything Reform do, we have to expose them. Because recently, I don't know if you've seen it on YouTube or on GB News that they're sharing on Facebook, is he's looking at the response of Welsh Government's anti-racism action plan, and he's picking individual issues out of there to expose what the action plan is all about, not understanding that some of the information that was fed in was just fed in. It wasn't part of the policy of the action plan. It is frightening that, you know, in 2026 that we might see 17 Reform UK members of the Senate. However, we got to do as much as we can to hold these individuals back to make sure we minimize their seats within the Senate. There's a lot of work being already done. I know Stand Up to Racism in Wales is doing a lot of work and making sure the likes of the English Defence League and the other fascist organisations don't get a foothold in our communities. I know there's other organisations doing some real good work around Show Racism Red Card, Searchlight exposing and doing some of the data. TUC Cymru internally have started their own work around education programs within trade union movements, because, you know, Weymouth is correct, you know, is that the trade unions have to stand their ground and make sure that they echo what trade unions stand for, you know. And if we don't do that and we get the far right in trade unions trying to manipulate the agenda, it will be really frightening. And remember, this is not the first time it's happened. You know, in 2002, you know, ASLEF chucked out one of their members who was a BNP member. They lost their case in the UK court, but went to Europe, and that was overturned and said, well, if an individual's got a choice of joining a trade union's got a choice of making sure who they pick and who they don't pick. And recently, the FBU have actually chucked somebody out of the FBU because they're fascist and racist attitude. And we have to be hard and fast on this basis. Trade unions got a lot of work to do. They've done some real fantastic work in the past. They've worked with organizations like Stand Up to Racism, Hope Not Hate, Show Racism Red Card, and other organizations that are fighting fascists and racists. And we have to keep that continuous, because like I said, if we do get a reform gets a foothold in Wales,
1 minute, please,
and they do get a coalition, you know, in Wales, that will give them a strength in Westminster in 4 years' time, and we got to avoid that. So just wanted to give you a flavour of what's happening in Wales. There is going to be a lot of work happening now, not later, because if we don't start now, we leave it too late, they will get a foothold, and we have to expose them. We've got to start our work now. The Wales TUC, I know TUC Cymru has started that work, and we're hoping that the trade unions in Wales will make sure that they send their members onto our training courses. So thank you for listening, and thanks for the invite.
Thank you so much, Amajit. It's fantastic to know that our comrades in Wales are fighting back. It's terrible to think of places like Llanelli with such great traditions being, you know, at risk from the far right, but we know that you can fight back against them. All right, and our third speaker, Maria Chandragiani, who's the UCU President-elect. So pleased to have you with us. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you all. Thank you, Stand Up to Racism, for organizing this very important event. I would like to take the points Amajit just made further and reinforce the important role trade unions have to play in order to stop the far right, which aims to divide workers and blame migrants, as it was the case in the United States, which led to that result. And those key people proposed by the US incoming administration, we need stronger trade unions, as we believe in our capacity to make life better for working people. Unions should take time and effort to organize all staff, including casualized staff. To give you an example, in the post-16 education sector, we are in the same league as hotels and catering for temporary and insecure employment. 46% of university staff and 60% of college staff are on zero-hour contracts to deliver teaching. 68% of our researchers in higher education are on fixed-term contracts, with many more dependent on short-term funding for continued employment. Unions need to take the time and effort to organize casualized staff, usually from groups with protected characteristics. In order to take on the far right, we need to avert a number of crises. First, the climate emergency. There are no jobs on a dead planet. We face an environmental crisis, not only in terms of global warming, making areas of the planet uninhabitable, but also loss of biodiversity and contamination of the food chain that, of course, the far right pretends does not exist. Green bargaining, including environmental demands around sustainability, should be at the top of our agenda. Equally, for UCU, at the top of our priorities is tackling the crisis of the funding system of the post-16 education sector, which we see unfolding in front of our eyes. We oppose student fees, let alone their increase, for a good which is inherently public. We see some 2,500 jobs lost in the sector. We hear talk of universities closing. This crisis does not only impact on post-16 education, does not only impact on staff, universities or colleges, but also to local and regional communities in terms of loss of business, loss of amenities, loss of opportunities, and a direct attack to working class students. We need an end to this educational vandalism. We need to stop emboldening the far right. We need to stop the Labour government appearing succumbing to the far right narrative. To give you an example, international students continue forming part of net migration figures for a reason no one really can explain. The Labour government needs to understand that by adopting the far right narrative, they strengthen their effectiveness both in politics but also in workplaces. We are, of course, happy to see the departure of Conservatives in the UK. We must, however, recognize the implications of the legacy of years of austerity. Many people live in areas with few employment opportunities, dependent on food banks. Work does not pay enough for many, at least not enough to pay all bills and put food on the table. Working class living standards have declined. And in order to tackle on the far right, we need socialist solutions. We need economic policies which reverse austerity instead of policies which penalize families with more than 2 children, instead of policies which stop pensioners putting their heating on. Improved wages, improved working class living standards, affordable social housing, green jobs are needed now. These are the means to tackle on the far right. If Labour disappoints and fails to tackle the legacy of inequality, the far right will become even more attractive, as was the case in the US. Trade unions are stronger when we put equality at the heart of everything we do. We, of course, condemn the anti-woke nonsense which rubbishes the equality agenda. We condemn the call from the far right to do away with the Equalities Act 2010, while we recognize that it is not perfect. For instance, it does not extend, or rather it needs extending to recognize the status and legal rights of non-binary people as a protected group. It is important to have a law which prohibits discrimination. The far right wants to put the clock back decades. We need to stop this now. In addition, trade unions grow and get stronger when we take industrial action to defend jobs, pay, terms and conditions, equality. And on top of this, our internationalism is the best way to take on the far right, learning from the experience of workers worldwide by standing in solidarity with workers resisting dictatorship, invasion, imperialist wars, and genocide. International solidarity with the people of Palestine, Sudan, Lebanon, and elsewhere is essential, especially in a world where the nationalist and protectionist voices of the far right become stronger. Against their racism, xenophobia, and fascism, we stand for a world of international solidarity, protection of the environment, and universal workers' rights. The United States, UK, Austria, and French elections, as well as the German government crisis, show us that taking on the far right is happening now, needs to happen now. We know that in Nazi Germany, the fascists destroyed independent trade unions. We are counter-mobilizing now against fascist attacks. We defeat fascism by showing working people that socialism is the answer to their problems. The trade union movement must indeed play a leading role in opposing the far right in the UK and everywhere. No passerelle.
Thank you, Maria. Absolutely brilliant points. Very well made. Thank you. Education is so at risk, isn't it, under people like Nigel Farage? We have activists here from the B6 College in the East End, currently on strike against this corporate entity that has bought it out, a fantastic anti-racist college. And guess what? Now being brutally attacked by this corporation. And speaking of the East End, one of my comrades said to me earlier, please call him Nigel Farage. Don't call him Nigel Farage. Not Hyacinth Bouquet, Hyacinth Bucket, isn't he? Right, let's take as many speakers as we can. I'm going to be really fierce and keep you to two absolute maximum of 3 minutes each, but I'll take as many as I can. And then we'll go back to our speakers to respond in the order that they spoke in. Okay, let's see some hands, lady there at the front. Front gentleman there. And yeah, two people behind there. Who else have we got? A lady there with the scarf and high vis. Yeah. Just making a note so I remember who to call. Roger Huddle. Not Roger Huddle, sorry. Yes. It's been a long time.
Who's first?
First one is the gentleman. No. And on the lady here, right in the front.
That's
here.
what I thought.
Yeah. Should we do this in a block first? Yeah, okay.
Hello, my name is Emma, and I have a question for you all. The left is basically in the business of building a coalition of the wounded, and the easiest way to break the coalition of the wounded is by ignoring oppression of certain groups of people selectively. We've seen it happen with Kamala Harris ignoring the oppression of Palestinians, for instance. And one group of people who is front and center in modern far-right and modern fascist rhetoric and gets a lot of hate from them is trans people. And in particular, the group that gets the most vile and the most violent hate is Black trans women. And in 4 days, it will be Transgender Remembrance Day. And if you look at the list of victims of people who have been murdered for being trans, it's disproportionately Black trans women. And we are here discussing about tackling far-right, tackling fascism. And in the hours I've been here, I haven't heard a word trans being mentioned once. Maria mentioned non-binary people, and that was the only mention I've heard so far. And even though other groups of people, even though trans people have been targeted in Holocaust, even though other groups of people have been mentioned, like homeless people, women, gay people, so like there is some intersectionality, but like trans people have been completely left out of this discourse. My question to you is, can we build a movement that is like actually truly inclusive and intersectional? And can we build a movement that doesn't selectively ignore groups of people who are being oppressed when it is inconvenient to acknowledge that oppression? Can we do that?
Hi, I'm Andy from Lewis Stand Up to Racism, which is near Brighton. And just on the last point, we heard just before the August the 7th counter demo against the fascists in Brighton, or I became aware a few weeks before that, that there was a really large trans pride demo in Brighton. And our first thought was to invite trans pride to join the anti-fascist demonstration. And they did. They obviously they turned up in great numbers. So there are those links there. I'm sorry that has been mentioned before, but it is true. So just come back to Lewis. I've got some questions about how we operate against reform electorally. We've got a voice in Lewis. I mean, in early August we had 3 members, and I wasn't one of them. Now we've got 80. We've had a successful LMHR gig, which was opened by the mayor and attended by the women's football team locally and club officials as our official guests. Great do. We raised some money and 100 people came. So, I mean, we've done other things. We've got a bi-weekly or sort of fortnightly stall in town, and we're always meeting new people. There's a 3-way split in Lewis between Lib Dems, Green and Labour. And we've been castigated by Labour recently for organising, daring to call the anti-Trump protest of last week. We were criticised by Labour. And I just wonder whether people sort of wonder whether the new relationship between Starmer and Trump will dampen down Labour's involvement in this movement. I hope not, but it's something. But what I want to ask is, how do we work with other political parties? Do we canvass with them? Do we go out with them? Do we canvass separately, invite them to come as part of Stand Up to Racism canvassing? I mean, how do we do that? And I obviously accept that before we get anywhere near canvassing, there's a lot of work to do in terms of unity, building that with all the different groups that we know, and getting as many people out as possible to do whatever it is that we end up doing. So this is a question, not a statement.
Thank you. Yeah, that's right.
Hi, thanks. My name is Yasmin and I'm from Manchester. Obviously, we know Reform UK and the Conservatives and now Labour politics are saturated in racism, scapegoating, Islamophobia, and this is what feeds the far right to come out. Reform and the Tories, their whole election project was wanting to stop the boats, and scarily, Reform UK came second to hundreds of counties in the UK across the elections. Reform UK, has plans to win hundreds more council election votes in 2025. And we don't want to be in a place where Farage is winning elections. I mean, personally, their rise is shocking. And the biggest group on social media is Reform UK. Young people like me agreeing with their politics on social media like TikTok, and even at university, they're becoming a threat. I think I saw at Exeter, they've set up a student group on campus. We must oppose them. You know, we've seen that people like Thomas Robinson feeds off the racism of mainstream politicians who say, you know, Palestine demos are hate marches and paint Muslims as the enemy within. All these crises in society are linked. And I just think it shows the importance of standing up. And if we let them roam the streets unopposed, we could see what's happening across Europe right now. You know, fascists in Germany, Austria, France, Italy, and the Netherlands have been gaining really big in these elections, and they've been on the streets. You know, in France, the Fascist National Rally won 30% in summer. I mean, France has always been a place where viciously racist and Islamophobic, but it was scarily that the left-wing parties were the ones that initially, you know, brought in the ban around the hijab. The FPO Freedom Party in Austria also just won big, and their party is an ex-leader who was a convicted SS war criminal. You know, the AfD in Germany, viciously racist, and all the core of their party are Nazis. You know, these figures across Europe and the world are warning signs for what could happen here, where attacks against Muslims and Islam are their main targets. You know, it's an urgent task to confront fascist threat across Europe here and in Britain too. The far right is allowed to look so strong because it's allowed to dominate large sections of the media, and it's not challenged enough on the streets. You know, here, the Labour Party and Keir Starmer today, they offer little. He goes along with the scapegoating of migrants and refugees, has failed to call out Islamophobia for the main reasons of the riots over summer, and at the same time is driving through attacks on working class citizens. Yvette Cooper, you know, said she was going to deport something like 140,000 migrants from the UK and send them back to where they came from. These are extremely serious statements, and we must have the strength to oppose the Labour Party too, you know, by working with people in the left like Diane Abbott and Jeremy Corbyn, who are here today, and oppose them and confront their racism and show that they're not welcome in our society today.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Chris from Southwark in South London. I just wanted to go back over to one of the themes in Maria's contribution. I mean, I certainly cannot disagree with the importance of trade unions, particularly in higher education, in stopping restrictions on international students and fighting for higher wages, taking industrial action over pay, et cetera, But I really think that there's a very important element that we have to add on to that as the contribution from trade unions. It's a very immediate one, and it's one that we've seen in action over the past couple of months, which I think needs to be translated into everything that we do in mobilizing against the far right. Now, I know, you know, contributions in this meeting tended to have talked more generally about the far right, and I'm going to start from the mobilization against Tommy Robinson, because if we look at one thing that really qualitatively changed the demonstration against Tommy Robinson at the end of October, it was the contribution, the participation of trade unions. The number of trade union banners was it was in over 100, I think. I mean, it made a huge difference to the confidence of people on the demonstration. It must have had a very significant impact on the people who were supporting Tommy Robinson. But I think that not only that, I think it shows that actually the trade union movement was actually organizing on the ground. And really that's what's going to make a difference. What our trade union is going to be doing in their workplaces to mobilize against the far right. Now, the last point of this comes back to what Weyman was talking about before, and that is that the trade unions cannot afford to allow themselves to be, to give sponsorship or authorization to Reform UK. Now, that may not be happening in the short term, but what we certainly need to be doing is whenever there is going to be a demonstration or protest against reform, just as it is against Tommy Robinson, we have to make sure that there is a plethora of trade union banners and trade union members who are at that protest. Because, you know, the last point, the very last point is the biggest organized movement within Britain is the trade union movement. You know, there are thousands of people who are in networks and campaign groups, but if the 6 million members of the trade union movement were to get behind the campaign that we're organizing in Stand Up to Racism, we would smash Reform UK and the far right very, very quickly.
Thank you. Kebede is over there. The lady in the hive is over there. Yeah, she's got, yeah.
Hi, yeah, my name is Kebede. I'm from Stand Up to Racism Wales, specifically Cardiff. Yeah, Reform UK have a real big foothold in Wales. They came second in 13 constituencies out of 39 constituencies. They had their Wales conference only a couple of weeks ago, and we were able to mobilize 60 people to demonstrate outside of that conference to say their rhetoric is not welcome. Our mobilization was a mixture of people from the climate movement, from the Palestine movement, young students. We were able to bring people together because they understood the threat of reform and how important it is to come together. I think it's really important that the trade unions get on board with our fight against the far right. I think the trade unions in Wales didn't really see the importance of mobilizing against Tommy Robinson, and we really fought in Wales to put that argument forward. And unfortunately, it didn't win out because they didn't support us. We put on coaches to come down, and the NEU was the only trade union who gave us money for our coach. So I really hope that the trade unions now are starting to wake up to the threat of reform, but unfortunately they're waking up because they feel like reform are going to lose votes. Labour are going to lose votes to reform. They can see that happened in the general election. Labour lost votes to reform. But Labour has taken that as they need to be hard on immigration. They need to be just as hard on racism as reform are. So I think it's really important that the trade unions in Wales get on board and understand the urgency of the fight that we have here in Wales. Like the speaker said, like Llanelli is a huge area in Wales where the far right really took a hold of because they pretended to be, for the workers. They pretended to say that, they're all about supporting the workers and it's the refugees' fault that the workers lost their jobs. We have a real hard fight in Wales and we cannot afford for the trade unions to have their little courses that they do on their days or have a little workbook that they put out and not mobilize on the ground. We're able to mobilize people on the ground as a grassroots activist, but we need trade union support. We need their resources and we need them to be on the ground with us. Thank you.
Paul Holbrook here. Oh, yes. Paul Holbrook, gentleman waving his paper at you there.
Thank you, Chair. And comrades, I just think it's difficult to exaggerate the threat that Reform UK constitute. They will be immensely boosted by the Trump victory. And all I will say, just to make that point, is that when Farage was asked to respond to the riots in the summer, what did he say? He said, all I know is that something horrible is happening in our once beautiful country. Now that is the appeal that he's going to build on in the next 2 years. We just heard from Kebede, the immense threat in Wales. Why did he hold his conference in Newport? Because he is eyeing 14 or 20 seats in the next Welsh Senate. But I think we have to face up to the fact that one of the main recruiting sergeants for Reform UK is none other than Keir Starmer. But you see, if you impose the winter fuel or remove the winter fuel allowance, if you refuse to extend the two-child cap or get rid of the two-child cap, or even if you put the bus cap up from £2 a week to £3 a week, that is devastating for working class families hit by the crisis. And then we're going to have extra student debt and so on and so on. The list is endless. And in addition to that, Keir Starmer is consorting with the fascist Meloni in Italy. He's consorting with others inside, the worst person he's bloody consorting with is bloody Trump himself. I mean, how fawning can you get? Did you read that ridiculous tweet he sent? Now, all this is deeply serious because what it does is that it is legitimizing and extending the process whereby mainstream political parties peddle racist filth. This is now part of the British media, and therefore we have to develop the strategy which I think we started in the Anti-Nazi League a long time ago. You see, the great Anti-Nazi League carnivals were important because what they did, they gave confidence to every racist in every workplace, every housing estate, every college, in order to give them the confidence to argue back against the racists. This is what we need to do now. We stand up to racism in the months to come, and the stakes are incredibly high. Remember, Labour got elected on a loveless landslide, 34%, 2% below Jeremy Corbyn in 2019, and in addition, they are now second. Reform are second in 89 seats, which are now Labour held. So what we have to do is very simple. We're saying to Reform UK, you will organise no meeting, you will organise no march, you will organise nothing without our active opposition. We'll argue against you, but most importantly, we will say you're a stalking horse for Trump and for the fascists.
Thank you. My name is Kevin Courtney. I once was General Secretary of the National Education Union, now retired. I'm doing a bit of work with Stand Up to Racism, and I'm just reflecting on the stuff about what unions can do. There is an argument that what the unions have to do is fight for better working class conditions where racism doesn't grow. And I agree with that. But I think it's also important to recognize that the fight against the far right is part of the fight for better working conditions. Because the hate that they peddle, the racism they peddle, divides our side and makes it harder for working class to win. So the unions have to call that out. We have to expose Nigel Farage. He says he's for the working man, maybe for the white working man. He says that. But then in Parliament, he votes against removing 0 hours contracts. He votes against removing hire and refire. We have to expose all of that. But there's more than exposing that the unions have to do. The unions do have to be involved in all, and in saying the unions, I don't mean the union tops alone anyway. All of us in the unions have to be part of something that is organizing our side. Mobilizing, yes, mobilizing matters. Organizing is slightly different. Long-term conversations with people. We have to organize so that, as Paul's just said, whenever they are on the streets, we are there and we are bigger than them. And we did do that for October the 26th. We need to do it better. But we also need to be planning now, organizing now in the electoral field. I hate to say that, but sometimes you have to do it. And I was part of the campaign to make sure that Nick Griffin didn't win an election for the BNP in Barking and Dagenham 10 or so years ago. And we have to do that again now. So we have to be involved in a campaign of getting union members to work on these campaigns for voter registration, for those voters to use their vote, and for them to use their vote against Reform UK. That is part of the left-wing message for this moment. We have to fight against Reform UK in every scenario we can, on the streets, at the ballot box. Don't let any of our colleagues vote Reform UK, vote against them, vote them out.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Sophia. I come from Norway. And the situation being described here in the UK is similar to, well, there are a lot of differences, but the Labour Party in Norway is, they're messing up completely as well. And they're doing really terrible on polls, and the Progress Party, which is within what's accepted in the political system in Norway, that's the most far right. And they're doing really, really well in polls. And they're resonating with the working class, and the youth wing is good on TikTok. So they're doing something right. And in addition to this, the Labour Party, they have been in government since 2021, and energy prices are up, food prices are up, and lives are difficult for the working class, and they're not delivering at all. So it's a huge problem, and it's a very serious situation in Norway. But in addition to that, they have increased military budgets in Norway. Within the next 12 years, they're going to spend 600 billion Norwegian kroner. That's, you have to time that with 14. I don't know how much it's. Yeah, so that's what they're prioritizing, and the working class is struggling. So it's a really serious situation in Norway as well. And so the solution is that the trade unions, well, the Progress Party, they're now trying to get the votes of the organized working class. If they succeed in that, we're going to have a really serious problem, because the trade unions in Norway, they have been mostly anti-racist, like mostly. And there's a lot of anti-racist education within the trade unions for workers, so that's a good thing. But it's a serious situation. I'm not really optimistic about next year. Elections are coming up next year, so we'll see how that goes. On a lighter note, we had Tommy Robinson came to Norway in September. That's not the light note that he came to Norway in September, but the light note was that they had to have a closed meeting. We didn't find out where the meeting was until it was too late, so we couldn't disrupt it. But the light note is that the far right, the extreme far right, they are not able to have open meetings. So yeah, thank you.
Back in the grey. Yeah, I was got one.
Yeah, look, I think we have to say that fear-mongering and catastrophizing won't get us anywhere. We need a sober analysis of the threat we face, and we have to try and give a lead to the millions of people in Britain who want to oppose Farage and reform. When it comes to the scale of the threat, I think we face two things. There's a far-right street movement around Tommy Robinson, and there's an electoral project around reform. And although both of them are separate, it's possible they will interlink and interact with each other. If you look at Germany, the danger of the AfD is that they interlink with the Kebede street movement and were able to propel themselves forward. So we have to shut down Robinson whenever he's on the streets. But the electoral campaign against reform is a bit of a different beast, to be honest. And we have to recognise, one, Reform are now a far-right party. I don't think they're the same as UKIP. Not that UKIP were ever nice, but Farage has now embraced the language, the rhetoric and the tactics of the international far right. Two is they do have momentum. These by-elections in the next few weeks are very good for them. They're getting 25% in Aberdeen, 30% in Telford, 40% in Blackpool. And if you look at the figures, they're now claiming 100,000 members. So the scale of that threat, I think, requires the kind of campaign that others talked about. It's not rushing towards a demo. We are going to have to do painstaking and painful work, to be honest, in areas like Doncaster, across Wales, where the left doesn't have much of a base. We're going to have to win an argument about going door to door, street to street, town to town, and to try and pull behind us the biggest campaign we can. And I do think it's right to point about how we've done it before. Look, Reform aren't the same as the BNP, but the BNP had 1 million votes in the Northwest European elections. The way they were taken down is by people like us uniting with Labour MPs, the trade unions, and building a mass campaign. And I do think that kind of campaign at the top can give everyone in this room confidence to build a stand-up to racism workplace group, to set up something locally, and to build stuff in the areas that are desperately needed. So we have to point to the threat, but we also have to point to a strategy that can win. Because Farage is organised, but there are more anti-racists in Britain than him, and we have to try and give that a lead.
Hi, I'm Alison Davey from Haringey. Sorry, Stand Up to Racism. We had a frightening moment in Tottenham, would you believe, of the far right trying to organise very recently. GB Resistance is a kind of online sort of journalist, they call themselves journalist platform there. They try to speak some of the language that attracts some people, like being anti-vax against Big Pharma and being for freedom, you know. Anyway, I feel food banks are, I'm a community activist, and I do think, yeah, food banks are, I've seen it myself, being targeted by the far right who are trying to get in to kind of really address the people's very real material needs. And if we don't fill those spaces, they will. So, I mean, that's really all I want to say. So yes, the trade unions, but also if you're not if you're not in a workplace, if you're not an active trade unionist in a workplace, get involved in Unite the Community, because that's what we're going to be doing in Haringey. We're going to be I haven't talked to everyone else yet, but that's what someone else said. That's what we need to do. So we're gonna do that. We're gonna talk to unite the community so that we get all the community workers and community activists to join Unite the Community, and then make sure that we are making people aware that this can happen. You can be schmoozed into letting a far right platform come and use your premises because you're desperate for money, and in the food banks and stuff, there's no funding for us. We're just managing with volunteers. So we are vulnerable to those kind of approaches. So just saying, get out there in your community, build that community from the grassroots up, relate to people's real material needs and the hardship they're facing, and then we put ourselves in a much better place to take on fascism when it rears its ugly and not obvious head. Okay?
Thank you. Yeah, gentleman at the back there, the orange shirt.
My name is Simon Hester. I'm from Hastings, Stand Up to Racism, and the chair of the Hastings Trade Union Council. I agree with something Maria said right at the beginning when she, in her introduction, when she said we need socialist policies to combat austerity. And she also said, if Labour disappoints, we might have to do other things. Well, let's be honest, Labour has already started disappointing and it's going to get worse. It's not a question of if. We have to be clear that under Labour, for working class people, it is likely, highly likely, that all the issues of austerity and problems we've had in housing, pay, etc., is going to get worse. So let's start with that. So I'm from Hastings. In Hastings, Reform UK got 6,000 votes at the general election, which was a big shock to everybody. In the surrounding constituency, next door constituency, another 6,000 votes. There are deep pools of poverty going on for generation after generation, and deprivation on a massive scale in these small towns around the south coast and various other parts of the country. And many, many of the votes for Reform UK came from white working class people. We have to face that fact. And we also have to face that Trump's victory and what he represents has boosted Farage, Reform UK, and many of the people who want to see a racist solution to the problems they face. And their first target are going to be the May elections this year in 2025, coming up in a few months' time. And obviously, the unions are going to be absolutely central to the fight back of people have mentioned already. And the significance of that, just look at what happened with Trump. One of the people who spoke at the Republican convention in support of Trump was a leading member of the Teamster Union. Now, it's good, absolutely central. They were meeting in the TUC Congress House. That is really, really important and very, very good. The unions have massive social weight in this country, huge numbers of members, lots of money to finance a campaign. The unions are central to what we can do. But we all know that getting the official trade union position is the first step, but is by no means the last step. We have to win the membership and the rank and file to take a strong position of anti-racism and in support of our campaign. So I think we have, I'm repeating what other people have said, but I just want to make 4 concrete proposals. 1, we have to start now to make every union branch and every workplace somewhere that the anti-racists have are winning the argument and they become the citadels of the anti-racist movement. 2, we will need to launch a massive leafleting operation, massive door-to-door leafleting operation. I don't mean 5,000 leaflets or 10,000 leaflets. We're talking millions upon millions of leaflets, making the argument against racism and all the things that Kevin and other people have talked about, the NHS and so on. And thirdly, protest and harass every single Reform UK candidate. In January in Hastings, the Hastings Stand Up to Racism meeting is going to be how are we going to combat Reform UK in May. Start in January. Let's start the ball rolling.
Thank you. Lady in the blue shirt there. No. This way. Oh. There. Blue shirt, stripy scarf. Yeah. You're getting your steps in. That's the main thing. Thank you.
Right. Thanks. Yeah, I'm from South London Stand Up to Racism, and I think a lot of speakers have already covered some of the ground I wanted to go through. I think for most people, when it comes to the election, I've been recently down in Aldershot, and what people's expectation out of life is that you have a roof over your head and a doctor when you need it. And Reform has used that to weaponize that against our side, because our side has failed to put up a response. Every time that Rachel Reeves opens her mouth, my heart sinks. Every time, because I know it's another nail in that coffin of the argument for winning the welfare state. So when we're talking about fighting on two fronts, yes, we need to create that inoculation in our workplaces as widely as possible. Yes, we need to stop them have the oxygen for moving about, but we have got quite a lot more to do than that. And I think the argument about housing, the argument about the NHS, our side's got to get the upper hand on that. You cannot find yourself in a situation like some of us found ourselves in Aldershot the other week, where we find some old bloke in what looked like baby clothes, ex-Nazi footballer, standing there with a big sign saying, they're not going to Rwanda, they're coming to Rushmore. An attack on refugees, linking it with the housing crisis, and standing outside an empty building. We have to be really specific about who's to blame for the housing crisis. That block that they're talking about, profiteers are holding on to that block, getting contracts for placing people temporarily, and not prepared to sell the building because it's acting as a safety deposit box for millionaires. And they use the word luxury a lot. Well, there's one person who really does know all about luxury. That's Nigel Farage, who's been swanning around in Mar-a-Lago. We need to be doing much more of that and need to be pulling that back together. And I think we have to be, when people talk about the scale of it, I think the scale of what's happening to what you might call the social wage in life, PFI initiatives, you know, where the sell-off of so many assets to private finance funding, many of these are coming to the end in our health service, in our welfare state, in our care area. So the pressures are going to become tighter. And if we leave all this to Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer to run the argument, we are going to be in even bigger trouble. So I think stand up to racism, the fighting on two fronts, we really have to make it two fronts. And
okay, I'm sorry though, I know there were some more people that wanted to come in, but we are at time for that because I wanted to get back to our speakers to sum up for us. So they're going to sum up for us and take up some of those points in the order that they spoke before, which will be Weyman, Amajit, who's online, and then Maria. And just before we do that, I wanted to say there's a leaflet, there's a good new leaflet that Stand Up to Racism have done on reform. If you want to take it out, I'm going to be taking it out next week because I've just found out that my nearest town and little village, there are 2 reform candidates standing. So it might just be me. But I'm going to take some leaflets, and you, Ruth, you can come as well and shove them through letterboxes. So please watch out for that. And I just also wanted to say quickly that today is the day that we very sadly lost 12 years ago, Julie Waterson, who many of you will have known, who was a fantastic activist for the Anti-Nazi League and others. And I just wanted to remember her. Thank you. Over to you, Weyman.
I want to talk about the threat of the fascists is there, and we have to stop them on the streets. But I want to talk about the electoral campaign against reform, because it will be on the electoral form. And firstly, let me be absolutely clear. The trans fight will be part of the fight to expose what Farage stands for, and it will have to be part of it, because I'm talking about the coalition that's going to be built. And the coalition is going to be built of all those people that want to resist and stop reform. That includes people from the Labour Party, to be honest. I mean, that's funny because most of my time I've been spent over this week has been going to visit people from the different parts of the Labour Party, saying that they're going to have to be part of the campaign and moving those people that will support us to support the campaign that's going to be there. I also think it has to be a campaign that involves different communities. I've been speaking at all the different mosques about what the danger reform reflects to us and why they have to be involved. In other words, we're going to have to build a new coalition. Now, the coalition's already there, but it hasn't actually been built. And the reason why I say that is because I was one of the people that organised a campaign in Barking and Dagenham. And the campaign in Barking and Dagenham was about finding leaders in the local area that would put together. For instance, the mothers group were the group that leafleted every primary school against the BNP. We didn't do it. We gave them the leaflets and they leafleted them. And then I remember once the BNP said, we're going to out-sticker the UAF because they're getting on our nerves. So we put stickers in every school, everywhere they went to cinema, there was a sticker out there and whatever it is. And the leader had to turn around and said, well, that didn't work, did it? And the reason why I say that is because actually what it meant was more and more people were involved. The other thing about the far right is Nigel Farage thinks he's interesting. He's actually really boring. And it's important that we say that because actually there's other forces, music, poetry, elements actually, which we're going to have to bring into the movement in order to defeat. In other words, we can't afford to run a boring campaign. We have to run a campaign that brings in young people, brings in the diversity of that. And also, it has to be a very tolerant campaign. You know what the most difficult argument in the United Front is? Unity. Everybody says, oh yeah, I agree with everybody until we're all in the same room. Right? And then we find a reason why we disagree with each other. Well, I couldn't possibly talk to you on a Wednesday afternoon. What we have to agree on is that we don't want reform, and can we get the maximum amount of people in order to do that? Now, I do believe the trade unions will play a critical role, but you know, I used to be a lecturer inside a college, but I tell you one thing, one of the reasons why we won the students to join us because we're very, very clear about why we were against Islamophobia, why we're against anti-Semitism, and why we got them to be active themselves as part of a campaign that they could join. So they could join with us with UCU in an active anti-racist coalition campaign, have a say. So we had a youth wing that was both active. And I think you can only do that by having a united front. You have a union to fight for those conditions that have to be in it, but we have to have a large, dynamic, united front. And it can't start from in 2 years' time. It's got to start from tomorrow with the leaflets and wherever it is. But we're building that pitch. It's not something that's already formed. It's true that we have to get that coalition together now, and we're just in the process of beginning it. We've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. We have to use the balance between the two in order to build that unity.
Brilliant.
Stop.
Very, very well said. Let's bring Amarjit Singh, who's online from Wales to UC.
Yeah, just continuing on from Weymouth, and I think it's important to understand, you know, we have to build a coalition with like-minded people and organisations, and there are people in the Labour Party who are, you know, comrades that are aligned to us. You know, Kebede said about the trade unions not playing their part. I believe the trade unions are playing their part within their own unions, because we have to have them difficult conversations within the workplace around reform and them being a far right organisation. It's important that we equip reps and members in trade unions to have them difficult conversations in the workplace. Trade unions have got a place to play on the streets as well. I'm not saying that. It's vital. Somebody who knows my background, you know, I always made sure that if there was a rally or march, that if I could make it, I would be there to show solidarity. But I did the same work within my home union, the CWU. I was a branch secretary for 15 years, did a lot of work in Wales, was a founding member of Unite Against Fascism in Wales as a treasurer. So, you know, I've seen the experience that other people can bring. And some people aren't comfortable in going on the streets and demonstrating, but some people are comfortable then in the workplace and making sure that they get the message out why individuals don't vote for reform. And the other thing that, you know, not all members, not all unions are member of the Labour Party, remember, or political parties that stops them campaigning. But vitally, I think it's important to understand that, you know, the trade union movement will play a part in making sure in 2026 that, you know, that reform don't get a foothold in Wales.
1 minute, please.
And, you know, just finishing off, I think we are stronger united than having a separate agenda. And I think it's important we drive that home. coalition is important, and we've got to start that coalition now rather than later. And we all have a part to play in on the streets and in the workplaces.
Thank you so much, Amajit. Brilliant contribution. All right, over to Maria from UCU.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. I would like to summarize by quoting Kevin first. Our fight against the far right is indeed absolutely part of our fight for improving our conditions. There is no denying that. And absolutely our place as trade unionists is in the streets when far-right events happen. In fact, I'm proud that my comrades from UCU were in very large numbers exactly in the street to stop those events in the summer. Certainly in education, we need to capitalize from our experience working with our students successfully for encampments in support of Palestine. Needless to say that at this point in time, we are defending these very students in SOAS and in Leicester, where they have been arrested by police. So we need to take this work with our students further in order to work against the far right. Certainly, trans sisters, certainly intersectionality are at the top of our equality agenda. We cannot effectively win anti-abortionists. We cannot effectively defend working class people without defending Black, disabled, trans sisters. That goes without saying. Maybe I should close here, but by saying that we do have a lot of work to do, but there is a lot of us, and we are prepared to take on the far right now. Solidarity, comrades.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you to everybody. Thank you, Weyman. Thank you, Amajit. Thanks all of you, everyone who contributed. No pass around and no to Farage.